Welcome everybody to this new episode of Dhandha Series by Omkara Capital. It's a very interesting company we are featuring today. I'm sure a lot of us may not have even heard of Nelcast. I have to put disclaimers first. This is one of the idea we had given to our clients long back. We wanted to play on the manufacturing theme, and this was one company. I think their history has been phenomenal in which the way they have scaled up. So we are investors. We have advised this company to our clients. That's a disclaimer. And the other important disclaimer is that we don't have any economic interest with Nelcast. Me, Varinder Bansal, or even Omkara Capital don't have any economic interest with Deepak Ji or even Nelcast as a company. This is purely an educational series where we wanted to understand the business in a very, very simple language. Now, the reason of Dhandha series is always is that let's break up the business into the most simple language, which can relate to. My mother can even understand that how simple is to understand the business. Of course, with me, I'm joined by Abhishek. He has been working on this company for a long time. Thank you, Abhishek, for joining. And Deepak ji, thank you so much for your time. We love to learn from you today. And you will be our guru, our teacher, for today, for helping us learn Nelcast.
Thank you, Varinder ji. Looking forward to it.
Thank you. So, sir, we always say, this is a boring thing, but we always say that, let's work with the principle of PPP, which is promoters first, then the product, and then the price. So let us focus on the promoters first. Help us to understand the journey of Nelcast, and more importantly, about the promoters, your family, yourself, everything.
Sure. So I'll just start with myself and introduce myself. So I grew up in Chennai. And as I was growing up, I was quite fond of technology. In fact, when I was 12 years old, I designed the first website for Nelcast.com way back, many years ago, decades ago. At the age of 17, I moved to the US to study engineering at Northwestern University. So I have a dual engineering degree in material science and engineering and manufacturing and design engineering. My first job was actually while I was still in college. I got a job as a research assistant, working with a professor to develop a blast-proof concrete, which was actually a project funded by the US Army Engineering Corps. So it was a pretty cool, pretty interesting project. The project went well. They were able to get more funding, and that means they got a PhD student, and they no longer needed an undergraduate student like me. So I moved on to other jobs that I had while I was studying at the university. I also was involved with the Northwestern University solar car team. So we actually built and raced a solar-powered car across the US, which was pretty interesting. And my senior project was to actually test a MEMS device to look at the strength of carbon nanotubes. So this is the kind of things I was doing in college, and I was really enjoying myself. During my summer holidays, though, before my fourth year, I actually came down to India and I spent 3 months learning about Nelcast. And that's when I actually fell in love with manufacturing. Right? Manufacturing has really become, I would call it now, my first love. Please don't let my wife hear that, but certainly that is very much true. So then I decided rather than going into research or anything like that, I would focus on manufacturing. And so my first job was at Federal Mogul in the US as a manufacturing engineer. I spent 1.5 years in a plant that was manufacturing gaskets, 1 year in a plant that was manufacturing piston rings. And it was a great time. I really enjoyed what I was doing. I then came back for a year to Nelcast. I worked on manufacturing strategy and projects. In fact, one of the projects that I'd taken up was what was, our biggest bottleneck at that time, in 2009. And we were able to overcome that bottleneck and really build a nice systemized way of that process. After that, I went back to the US. I did my business school at the Kellogg School of Management, where I got my MBA. And while I was studying there, the summer, I did an internship at John Deere. And I was working on their Russia and CIS market strategy. It was a very, very interesting project. In fact, they had offered me the opportunity to come back and work for them full time. However, I chose to move back to India, and I've been at the helm of Nelcast ever since. So I thought so that's a little bit about myself. Let me tell you a little more also about company and my father. who founded the company.
So before the company, let's focus more on the family as well, like who all are family, whether you have any other businesses apart from Nelcast, in the family or not.
Yeah, so this is our only business that we do as a family, and this is what our entire focus is on. As far as the promoters go, there are two promoters now for the company: myself and my sister. My sister lives in the US, and previously she was used to work at Deutsche Bank. She's actually on the board of directors of Nelcast, and she's also been helping us with our US operations and our US growth and customers, and setting us up with the right backbone and foundation for us to be able to succeed in that market.
Oh, lovely. When did you come back to Nelcast?
2012.
Okay, understood. So the way what you've studied in Kellogg's and the projects what you've undertaken seems a very different, very creative, a very sexy kind of things altogether. And coming to a very boring business of castings and all, and to Chennai, back to Chennai, it's very different, right? What prompted you?
So I think I saw great opportunity in casting, right? I spent obviously a couple of summers while I was in college, and then the 1 year before I went to business school, and that 1 year before I went to Kellogg and did my MBA was also a little bit of a tryout period to see if this is what I wanted to do long term. And I felt that there was this great amount of potential of what we could do. I was fascinated by also some of the technical challenges that are there. And I certainly felt that there was a great opportunity that we could build something special. And that's what was, I would say, the biggest driving factor of me coming back.
What are those things? Like, what are the things what you saw in 2012 to prompt you to come back?
Yeah, so I would say, there's a couple of things. One, I think really looking at how we can focus on manufacturing excellence, right? And that's something that, as I mentioned, manufacturing is my first love, and what we can do there. The second is also on the technical side, right? When we start talking about complex castings and how we produce complex castings, there's a certain amount of art, there's a certain amount of engineering that goes into it. How you might feed metal into the mold, how you might do a variety of other things, which I still find extremely stimulating, right? And I am personally involved with a lot of those, and it gets me quite excited.
I'll come to the company later. But before I come to the company, it's important to understand for a lot of viewers who don't even understand what casting is. Because here sometimes, foundries, castings, when you use the word complex castings, it's all understood like a very commodity kind of a business by a lot of people. So can you help us to understand the industry first? Like what's the difference between a forging, a casting, or something you do? So the industry is important because when you came down in 2012, but if I see the numbers from 2012 to say 2019-20, they were almost stagnant, almost flat. So 7-8 years, no results. But what are those big things in your mind, what you saw in the industry, the complexity and everything, and a bit about the industry to help us understand the difference between forging, casting, and the complexities what are undertaken in this industry?
So let me just start. Maybe I can start by explaining, what is a casting, right? So in a very, very simple way of explaining the casting process, you're basically melting material and you're pouring it into a mold. That's the most simplest way you can talk about casting, right? So that material could be iron, it could be steel, it could be titanium, it could be plastic, it could be aluminum, whatever it is. It's casting, right? It's a very, very simple way of thinking about casting. Is you're just melting some material and you're pouring it into a mold, right? In India, if you see roughly about among the metals, about 80% of the tonnage will actually be iron castings. Right, that's the roughly what the product is. I'll get a little more specific on what type of casting we do and what type of process we do. So the process that we do is a technology called high pressure green sand molding. So what we're doing here in a very simple way is we're taking sand, and then there's a very special type of a clay called bentonite, which in India is available in the Kutch region. And then there's a carbon additive that you add. You add some water, you mix it all together at a very specific proportion to achieve certain properties. And then you take this mixed sand and you put it in on what we call a pattern or a tool, right? And then you just squeeze it with a high amount of pressure. And with that squeeze pressure, what happens is the mold actually develops a lot of strength. So that sand is really what is forming the mold, right? That is what is withstanding the pressure that is coming from the metal while it is being poured, while it's cooling, all of that, right? So this is how the mold is made. So you make one mold, which would be the bottom half, and then you'd make another mold, which would be the top half, and you put them together, right? And before you put them together, if you need to have any kind of a cavity inside the mold, right? That cavity is formed using what we call a core. Core is also made out of sand, but typically it has some sort of chemical resin in it. And the nice thing is, and then once you have it closed, you pour metal inside the mold. Once it cools, what happens is, because this is sand, you just start vibrating it, and the sand disintegrates, and about 95 to 97% of our sand gets recycled. So it's a very green process, right? And even if you look at our raw materials, what we're doing, majority of the raw material, what we're utilizing, maybe 90+%, is steel scrap, right? Again, it's a recycling process. So in terms of, how we look at our process, I think the biggest, area of impact that we have is in terms of energy, because everything else is virtually largely recycled. So that sand is recycled, again, mixed with some new sand, mixed with some more of the clay, mixed with some more, and reused again and again. Now, if I take, what is a forging? A forging is, in very simple words, metal bashing, right? So you're taking a steel billet or a block of a certain size, and you're using, fairly sophisticated tools and dies to beat it into its final shape. So each of these processes will have its advantages, disadvantages, which will make them suitable for different parts, right? There'll be maybe a few type of parts, maybe some shafts, things like that might be common for both. But otherwise, typically, there'll be certain products that are only forging. There'll be certain products that are only casting. There'll be a small area where, depending on the manufacturer, they might prefer either a casting or a forging, for a variety of reasons. The advantage that you get in casting is certainly, from a casting perspective, you can do much more complex, intricate shapes, because you have this core inside, which is also made of sand and disintegrates. So you can form fairly complex internal cavities that you cannot form in forging, because the forging, you have to have a way for the die to come back out, right? So if you have a very complex shape, once you beat it around it, you can't pull the die out, right? So that's one of the difficulties to make this type of parts, right? So that's why, as I said, there are few parts that are well suited for casting. In terms of forging, typically people would use steel in the forging process. And when you use steel as against iron, you get maybe better mechanical properties, higher strength, things like that. So each has its advantages and disadvantages. But it's also not fair to compare the two processes or companies across the two industries, mainly because the basic premise of how we work is a little bit different.
So pardon my ignorance. So if I'm a OEM who wants to make a connecting rod, I can use either process?
Again, depends on the process. Yes, I mean, everything, to put it simply, I think a connecting rod, you could potentially make it in forging or in casting. In forging, you might have greater strength. So maybe you have the ability to make it a little smaller or something like that, because you can also do heat treatment, because it is a steel one. But something, let's say, for example, an engine block, you can't do that in a forging, right? If you were talking about a differential carrier, you can't do that in a forging. So it really depends on the shape of the part, whether forging is feasible or not. Whereas for casting, I think the shape in most cases can be made, because the shape is what also determines whether something is very complex or simple.
How big are these industries, and which are the industries you majorly cater to? I just want to understand that you move along with industries, because you are always the contract manufacturer or the back end for a lot of your buyers, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, we work in a couple of different ways. One, we work as a tier one, where we would supply to the OEM, which could be Leyland, Tata, TAFE, any of these guys. Or in some cases, we might supply a component to our customer, who would then assemble it into, let's say, an axle or a steering or something like that, and then they would supply it to the OEM, right? So we actually work in both ways. So the latter example would probably be a Dana and Automotive Axles or a Meritor, those kind of companies as well we work with. Now, when I look at the overall picture of the segments that we're in the tractor segment, we're talking about roughly, 9.5 lakh tractors a year, right? That are being made in India. I would say roughly there's perhaps, excluding the engine block, which is a space we're not in, roughly maybe about 500, 600 kilos of castings that go into each one of those tractors, right? Just a rough approximation, can vary depending on the horsepower range, the specific model, and all of that. But roughly that's the number. In the case of commercial vehicles, I mean, we're talking about medium and heavy commercial vehicles, is roughly 350,000 vehicles a year kind of a business. Here, there can be a lot of variation in the amount of casting. If you take an intermediate commercial vehicle, right, as 9-ton, 12-ton capacity vehicle, you might only have, again, excluding the engine block and head, which we don't do, you might only have about 500, 600 kg of casting. If you go to the high-end tippers that are there in the market that are used for a lot of the construction equipment and all of that, you could have anywhere between 1.5, 1.8 tons of the same kind of castings in that vehicle. So it really depends a little bit on that. Let's say if we were to average it out, maybe about 800 kilos or so on a 350,000 quantity market is roughly kind of the market size that we are in and we cater to, and forms the bulk of it, right? There's still a little bit of passenger vehicle here, here and there. There's a little bit of the off-highway industry. There's a chunk in railways as well. But by and large, if you look at our overall business, about 70% of our business comes from these two segments, and 25% is coming from export. So really, that forms the bulk of our business.
So 350,000 you mentioned, right? Tons.
No, 350,000 vehicles a year is the MNHCV. So I'm saying it's probably approximately maybe 800, again, excluding block and head, and probably the brake drum, about 800 kilos or so per vehicle seems to be the. It can go even as high as 1.8 tons, as I said.
And how much is Nelcast, say, out of this entire market?
So overall, out of this amount, I think we would be, in terms of what we would be catering to the commercial vehicle, medium and heavy commercial vehicle market, I think we would probably be catering maybe about between 10 and 15% would be where we would be in the MNHCV space. Overall, again, across all products, right? Simple, complex, all of that. And on the tractor space, probably about 8 to 10% overall.
Who are your competitors?
So our competitors generally tend to vary based on customer. I think it depends on geography. So for example, if there's, supplying to a customer in the south, our competitors would typically be foundries either in the southern belt, right? Perhaps few of them in Kolhapur. And in the case of, let's say, tractor, Kirloskar Ferris might be one of the names you might be familiar with, or Sound Castings based in Kolhapur. Some of these people typically. When we're catering to our customers in the east, which is, obviously Tata Motors is a big one over there. A lot of the foundries are local, Jamshedpur based or Calcutta based kind of foundries, and we're the only kind of external foundry for these kind of products that we do. And then again, if you go all the way to the north, there doesn't seem to be too many high quality foundries in the northern region, and therefore, or at least of large scale. And so we find that again, other foundries from the western region are typically the competitors that might include a Mahindra CIE or a Neosim or a few others that are maybe in the Pune and then somewhere in the Kolhapur belt.
What is unique in what you do? Sorry, being blunt, but if I have capital, can I just go and set up a casting company? Because to do what you're doing, are there huge entry barriers? Because from your language, it feels that a lot of unorganized players are also there in the market.
Yeah. So I think what's unique about us that's different with the unorganized players and even many of the organized players is the range of product that we do. So we do both ductile iron and 3-iron parts. In addition to that, we are doing parts ranging from 450 grams, that is the lightest part that we make, all the way to 380 kilograms, that's the heaviest part that we make today. And then also on the range of complexity, we do simple parts and we do extremely complex parts, right? And I think that having that range gives us the ability to offer a basket to the customer that I don't believe anybody else in the industry can offer, right? I think that's unique, right? And also part of the unique proposition that we have is that we are able to do more complex, which also gives the customer the ability to do more optimization in the design, right? So when we talk about complexity, I think you had mentioned this earlier, there's a couple of things that impact complexity, right? One is, of course, how intricate those inner shapes are, right? So is it possible that it can be made with a core? If not, in some cases, we have 2, 3, 4, and the highest is actually 9 cores that are used to make one single casting. So we have to make all of these cores independently, assemble them all together, load them, fit them inside the mold. And then, when you pour it and the core disintegrates after all that work, you get this complex casting, right? That might be one level of complexity that we've gotten very good at. The other level of complexity that I think we've gotten good at is also in terms of specifically to ductile iron castings. When the metal is poured inside the mold, and as it starts to solidify, the metal has a tendency to shrink. So as the metal shrinks, what happens is porosity starts forming inside the casting. So one of the things that we do with our expertise and the team that we have, as well as the kind of simulation tools that we use, is we are looking at how we can connect external risers to the casting in such a way that as the casting cools, the porosity is actually pulled outside the casting into what are called runners and risers, which are then remelted, right? So this is how the metal enters into the mold. And so to be able to give a consistently porosity-free casting is something that is also it helps us do these complex parts, right? So it's not that we are specialized in doing one type of product; we can do the entire range of products.
Why can't someone like Bharat Forge? So I'm keeping all the stupid questions to me and all the intelligent financial questions Abhishek will ask. Okay, so please don't mind asking me all the stupid questions. Yeah. So why can't someone like a Bharat Forge or someone who is very big in forging can do castings as well?
So Bharat Forge actually, I believe, around 2011 to 2013 did explore the possibility of coming into the casting industry. That I've been made aware of that, but they've also quite some time ago dropped that idea for reasons best known to them, right? I think the competence that you need to run a casting industry is different. I think it's not just about the investment. Of course, if it's just a question of investment, anybody could do it. I think building that skill is certainly a challenge. The second part of it is, I think there's a lot of other variables that go in. So the getting familiar with your particular product and your particular process in your foundry is also very important, right? And to be able to take on these products, develop them, productionize them, and be able to meet the kind of volumes is also not easy, right? And that's one of the reasons that we've been successful, right? And just to give you an example of one particular product that we developed, this is some anecdote of something that happened in 2015. There were three castings that were that a customer was looking for development, right? So we quoted it. There was a Chinese supplier that quoted it. This is for the US market. They had what they call a technical review meeting. So in that technical review meeting, the Chinese supplier had that meeting. They said, yes, we can do whatever you're asking for. It's all done. We had our technical review meeting a couple of days after that. It was scheduled to run for about 1 hour. After 1.5 hours, we had to give up and then schedule another hour the next day to finish it. So we went through in extreme detail how we are going to manufacture it, what are the challenges that we see. We even found that in the drawings that they had provided us and the 3D model that they had provided us, there were discrepancies between the two, right? So given that, we won that business, right? In spite of the fact that I know that we were more expensive at that particular point of time, we still won the business, right? So it's a lot of, there is capability, know-how, and certainly stability that goes into producing these products.
Understood. So okay, I understood. So why, I want to also understand the period between say 2011 to 2020. Now, from your, what you have made us understand is that it's a very complex job. You need a complex production processes, detailing, in the work you do. Margins are less than 10%. Sales were almost flat for the last 8, 9, 10 years, between 2010 to 2020. Okay, what is your business dependent on?
Yeah, sure. So I think the one thing when you look at 2012, right, and maybe from 2012 to you bring it over to, let's say, 2018 or so, The one thing that changed completely was our product mix. If we look at 2012, there were a handful of products that made up a big chunk of our product mix, which were not very complex. So in 2013 and 14, when there was a slowdown in the commercial vehicle segment, what happened was, there were people starving for capacity, and therefore these not being very complex products, invaded onto our turf, right? And that was a point of time where we had a choice. We had a choice to say that, top line is important, so we will give discounts to customers, reduce prices and keep the business. Or we had to say that we are not willing to compromise on margins, and therefore we will be willing to forgo this business. But which also raised the question, if you forgo this business, what is the new business, right? And that's where we really spent those years building these capabilities, right? If you look at, go back to 2012, we only had one automated line and we had 10 manual lines, right? Today we have 6 automated lines, and we don't have any manual lines that are currently running, right? So this is one change that was necessary for us in order to do this. The other one was, creating the space, creating the capabilities, all the other equipment that are required and the processes that are required to handle this complexity, right? So certainly this is something that has taken us many years to do. We had many small steps and big steps along the way, developed some extremely complex products and learned from them, which gives us, again, skill to do more of such products, right? So that is something, I think if you look at that period of time, perhaps between 2013 to 2018, I think on the numbers front, you can't really see it. But I think if you look at the model mix and how it's changed and how that change is going to help us, has been helping us driving growth in the last couple of years and will help us drive growth for the next, 5-10 years. I think a lot of that seed work had to be done at that particular point of time. And that's what we were busy doing.
Have you seen change in terms of customers approaching you? Like, I always believe that why can't a lot of OEMs who you cater to, can they do casting on their own? They used to do forging as well sometimes. But in the last, say, couple of years, have you seen with all the complexities you have got into business, new product mix, what you have gotten into, is there a change in terms how clients are now approaching you?
I mean, certainly, right? I think there's a lot more. I think there's two things that I think are different, right? I think one, there's a lot more, focus on the relationship, right? Because I think, they would rather not grow the number of suppliers they have, but grow the depth of the relationship they have with each supplier, right? And this is potential for consolidation, right? As they would like to consolidate their supplier base down to a few, which I think is something that gives us an advantage because of our, range of products that we have. But I mean, that being said, I think, obviously price is very important and it's a very competitive world out there. So, we're constantly working with customers on how we can improve on those, on that front as well.
Okay, Abhishek, my last question, I promise. So Nelcast for investors say will remain as a volume story or a margin story? Because when I see other casting companies, like in your peer group, like a steel cast, they can do 20% margins or above, while you are still less than 10%. With more and more business coming in, should we consider Nelcast as a volume story or a margin story as well going ahead?
So I would say, let me try to separate a couple of things out in the way that I answer that, right? One is perhaps maybe the more medium term, right? Maybe let's talk about the next couple of years. I think the next couple of years is going to be both, right? Because we've already invested in capacities. The capacity, it's all about new product development and capacity utilization improvement. And some of that capacity utilization improvement is our own ability to ramp up that capacity, right? Especially in the newer plant. So that's one thing that we're working on, right? So as we get that capacity utilization up, so one is certainly it's going to be a volume that we will see play out. And the second one that we will see play out along with it in parallel, right? As the volume grows with better fixed cost absorption and better operating efficiencies, we will see margin, right? So I think in the next 2 to 3 years, you should expect to see both, right? At least I would expect to see both, right? And then looking at a little bit longer term, I see, two things, perhaps having an impact on how I answer this question, right? So the first is the kind of discussions we're having with several customers where they would like us to actually set a unit that is located closer to them. So some of these products that are, low margin per se, right, are products that we cannot do because of the transportation cost and the impact of the transportation cost being significant enough that it tilts the scale, right? So if you were located closer to them, these are products that are still very much in play, right? So there's one, and again, part of that consolidation play, right? So there is discussions happening with customers where we would look at, setting up a smaller unit focused for their needs closer to them. So this is something that would be more of a volume play, right? And on the other side, when we look at the global market and the kind of opportunities that we see in the global market, right, whether it's the US or Europe, right, as they're struggling with labor shortages in both places. US has tariffs on Chinese product. In addition to that, Europe is having energy issues, and there's great opportunity that's happening over there in the European and the North American markets. So we think that that's a great opportunity to capitalize on, which would be, higher value added products, more complex products. So we could perhaps, the way that we look at it is we'd expect to see both margin and volumes increase in the next 2 to 3 years. And then based on this strategy, I think we'll have two strategies playing out at the same time. Beyond that, where we would be looking both at margin on one section of the business, and another part would be volume focused growth as well.
But Deepakji, you are tied up with this CV cycle, right, and the tractor cycle, which can be very confusing sometimes. It has been a great CV cycle, at least for the last 1.5 to 2 years, and whatever reports, what we are also reading on ground, learning from Tata Motors, Ashok Leyland con calls, that things are looking to be strong. But what is your view? Because I don't know whether I can even look beyond 1.5 to 2 years in terms of what is happening in the EV and tractor cycle.
So, I mean, so that's one of the areas where our focus on exports, I think, has been a strategic reason that we've chosen to do this, right? And, this is a focus that we said that we took on at some point in 2013. So during FY14, we had taken this focus on, and we're seeing the results really play out today. So I think that the part of focusing on exports is also to de-link ourselves a little bit from the domestic cycle. At the end of the day, it's we would hope that cycles don't all peak or trough at the same time, and that's the best you can do to mitigate against that. And that's what we are we're working towards. And as we go forward and look at what the future might hold, there's also businesses that we've won in the last year and that we've actually won, which we've also started production on, which go into electric vehicle platforms as well. So that's something that is of importance to us to be part of that story as well.
Abhishek bhai.
Thank you so much, sir. It was very amazing conversation so far. So we briefly touched upon what is casting and forging. If you can just help us understand quickly machining, which is the next steps, and who are the key players we rely on for machining and our in-house capabilities for the same.
Sure. So machining is when you take what is either a rough casting or a rough forging. So typically in a casting, the kind of the tolerances that we would produce a casting to, again, depending on the specific product and the specific dimension, could be, plus or minus, let's say 0.8 millimeters or so, right? That might be a casting tolerance plus or minus 1 millimeter. That, these are the kind of casting tolerances that we're typically talking about in casting. Forging also would be something similar, maybe a little bit tighter. When you do the machining activity, you're removing the material, and basically so if, let's say, for example, you wanted to fit a bearing, a plus or minus 1 millimeter is not good enough to fit the bearing, right? Either it will be too loose or too tight. So you have the ability to machine that down to something that might be just a few microns, right? It might be 0.1 millimeters or 0.05 millimeters or even less than that, right? I've certainly seen tolerances that are in the single digit microns as well, which is 1,000th of a millimeter, right? So machining is really taking a product that is already cast or forged and removing the material to achieve a much greater tolerance, so you can fit something in that area or attach something to it, right? For example, perhaps another part would be drilling holes and putting tabs so you can tighten a screw or something like that. Now, in terms of machining, we do a little bit of about 70% of our castings that we sell today. We sell them as fully machined. Out of that 70%, roughly about 15% or so, we are machining it in-house, and the balance is being outsourced. One of the big players that we work with, that you might also be familiar with because there are now a listed entities, Craftsman Automation. So we work quite closely with them. So they might account for, out of our outsourced component, they might account for maybe about 50% of that. And then there's a couple of other smaller companies that we work with, two to be precise, that we also work with that are that would form the remaining 40% or so of our outsourced machining.
Okay. And the realization a difference between the some machine and non-machine sales that we do 30% left balance between these two.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you were to look at it, roughly, I think today on the overall sales, maybe about 20 rupees a kg or somewhere between 15 to 25 rupees a kg would be, the machining value add that's there, right? The rest would be the casting price.
Okay, understood, sir. So I wanted to understand some of our key products and our market share. And also, sir, you briefly mentioned that we are not into engines, mainly either for trucks or tractors. So would it be safer to say that we are absolutely tech agnostic company, be it EV or ICE vehicles?
Yeah, so I'll go through the products in a second, but absolutely right. So irrespective of whether it's an ICE or a EV, I don't believe that there's going to be a negative impact, certainly from this transition. I would actually argue that the EV transition could help us. There are some products that we have now started doing that don't exist in an ICE vehicle. So one of the things that happens in the EV, right? There are a couple of different ways that EVs are being constructed, right? One is, when you already have an existing platform, you're saying, how do I convert that into an EV, right? I'm talking more in terms of the truck industry. So what they're doing is they're replacing the engine with an electric motor, and then you still have the same propeller shaft, you still have the same axle, and everything else stays the same. So in that case, there's absolutely no impact. The second methodology that I've seen, right, which I think is going to gain more traction because when you develop an EV from ground up, is they're looking at what they call e-axles, right, where the motor is actually mounted directly onto the axle. So there's no engine, there's no transmission, right? In that particular case, the differential carriers that we are producing, which is the first product that actually become much heavier and more complex, right? And that is an area where we can really, I think, take advantage of. Right? So the rear differential carriers, we've got maybe about 60 to 70% market share, whereas on the forward differential carriers, which are used in heavy-duty tipper vehicles, it's about 90 to 95%. So when I look at the diff carrier that's used on an EV, it's actually very, very similar to the forward differential carrier, but bigger and heavier, right? But from a complexity standpoint, it's right in line with that. So I think EV is potentially an opportunity for us in terms of the business we do on the axles side. The other big chunk of business that we do on commercial vehicles goes into suspensions. So nothing's really going to change in a suspension, right? Maybe because now you have the motor also mounted on the suspension, maybe you need to beef it up and it becomes a little bigger and heavier, which is well and good. So I think that way, we're not going to be significantly affected. If I was to look at our overall business and say, what percentage would get negatively affected, right? Meaning disappear in an EV. And that number is probably 3 to 5%, right? So if we went 100% EV, assuming, so there's some transmission parts that we do that might get obsolete, but that's, again, like I said, 3 to 5% of our business. So it's relatively small impact that we see on that.
Understood. So almost 95% market share in forward differential carriers. So basically, we are having virtual monopoly in India for this particular product.
Yeah. So I think if you see one of those heavy-duty trucks on the road, the tippers that are being used for road construction, shallow mining, chances are very good you're looking at one of our Nelcast components on it.
Oh, wow, that is beautiful, sir. Sir, will you help us understand brief what this product is, forward differential carrier, where it is placed and what are the applications of this?
Sure. So the forward differential carrier is not used in all trucks, right? It's used only in the heavy-duty trucks. The reason it's used in the heavy-duty trucks is because they have two axles that are driven. Two of the rear axles are driven rather than one. In most of the trucks that you see, how many other axles you see, many of them are just dummy axles meant for taking the load, but they don't actually contribute to torque and driving of the vehicle. Only one axle does that in typical most of the vehicles that you might see. But in a growing segment, tippers, right, which is used in construction and shallow mining applications, they have two drive axles. What this does is it helps you get more torque onto the road. right? So therefore, if you're going through some fairly steep inclines or you've overloaded the truck quite a bit, you're still able to get that torque onto the road and be able to drive the vehicle. It's like a little bit like your 4x4 that you have, right? Four-wheel drive vehicles, cars and SUVs that are there. Here it's a 6x4, right? Because the front axle is not driven, the two rear axles are driven or multiple rear axles are driven. So what the role of this forward differential carrier is from the engine, there is next the transmission. From the transmission, there is then a propeller shaft that is running to the axle. So the forward differential carrier is sitting on the axle itself. It's mounted onto the axle. It has power coming in, which is the propeller shaft that's coming in into it. So it has to pass power to the two wheels on either side, right? So inside this differential carrier are all the bearings and gears, and the differential case is assembled with the diff gears. And this and then at the end, basically you have an axle shaft going out of it along the axle, which is where the wheel hubs and the brake drums and all and the wheels and all get assembled onto. So the forward differential carrier is unique compared to a regular differential carrier because not only does it have to pass power to the two wheels, it also has to pass power to the axle behind it. So it has some additional gearing and mechanisms inside it that will actually disconnect power or connect power, right? So you can either operate all four wheels running, or you can operate just two wheels as running, right? So it has some additional mechanisms like that. So it's not so it passes power to the axle behind it, and the axle behind it is a traditional, rear differential carrier, which will then only has to pass power to the axles and nothing behind.
So basically, it is a very complex product with multiple connectors.
Yeah, and these products we are actually, not just the high market share domestically, but we're also exporting these across the world into North America as well as Europe, and soon and Southeast Asia as well.
Okay, so I was going on to the exports only, sir, as my next part. So in 2015, we used to do around 2 crores out of exports, and today we are running at an annual run rate of almost 300 crores. So that is quite an amazing growth. So just wanted to understand what is driving this growth and what is our outlook for the same, sir?
Sure. So if I look at the global market, I think India is really getting to that place where India might be the preferred destination for buying castings. I probably would have said that about forgings 10 years ago, and I think they've certainly delivered on that. And I think we're there in castings, right? I think we've gotten there on castings. I think what's driving growth is certainly the price competitiveness, right? I think we are able to compete with the guys who are producing these either in Europe or in North America, and we're able to compete not just on price but also on quality, delivery, reliability, and on all of the factors. The way that we've grown is we really, we started this whole focus in 2013, and we started with many customers, few parts with each customer, and really it was more about building a credibility, right? So one particular example of a product that we did for one of the customers in North America, we started with a 30% share of business in 2016 when we actually launched. By the end of 2020, we were the single source. We were supplying 100% of the requirement of that product. So it was, we got 30, proved ourselves, stabilized our processes. We learned a lot because the complexity of the product is higher than the ones of the products in India. And then we went from 30 to 70, and then from 70 to 100, right? And that was the initial steps that we went through. Now, the nice thing is with customers, we are not just winning business where they feel, okay, I've got a domestic supplier, let me see how do I save cost, and I'm not taking too much of a risk because if it fails, I still have a domestic. We are winning business on new platforms, right? Which basically means the customer trusts us enough to say, this is my new business. I want you to develop it. There is nobody else developing it, right? Which means I trust you that you will not fail, right? And I think that's a trust that we take very seriously and something that I think that we've earned, right? And we're very mindful of the fact that something like this takes years to earn, but can be squandered away very quickly, right? So I think that's something that we are mindful of and focused on. So I think that with the growth that we've seen, the benefit, in some of these more developed markets is that, they have a level of scale that is significantly higher than what we have for any specific product. So I think we've been able to utilize that with growth, and more and more, the better we've performed, the more business that we've won. And like I said, fortunately, there are headwinds for foundries in US and as well as in Europe. And so, I think we're in a great position to capitalize on that for the next few years to come.
So what's your total capacity right now and the utilization levels?
So our total capacity, nameplate capacity is 160,000 tons. In reality, we could probably do maybe 75-80% of that capacity is what is an achievable number, which puts it at, let's say, about 130,000 tons or so. And out of that number, this year we believe we should be doing somewhere around 90,000 tons or so.
So you have enough capacity with you, right?
We do, yeah. So we believe we can get there to that. Again, we are dependent largely on the market, so it could be sooner or later, but perhaps within the next 2 to 3 years, we believe that we can get to that number, right? And that's what, when we were talking about growth in margins, that's something that will help us achieve better margins, certainly in addition to the volume.
So you don't need to do any additional capex?
There's no substantial capex required for that. We do have an ability to do some smaller capex and add some additional capacity, maybe another 50,000 tons or so for a relatively modest investment, not like within the existing facilities. But that's something that we're not looking at for this year. I think, again, depending on how the market forecast is and what we see on the horizon, it's something we might look at doing a partial of next year. But we don't see any large major capex happening soon.
What's the EBITDA per kg right now, sir? And how has it changed after you introduce all those different complex products? Have you seen increase in EBITDA per kg? Is that the right way to look at your company?
Absolutely. I think EBITDA per kg is the absolute right way to look at it, because the raw material pricing does happen to be a pass-through, right? There happens to be a lag typically of 1 quarter in that pass-through. So sometimes we benefit, sometimes we don't. But, kind of if you take a period of time, EBITDA per kg is the right way, in my view, to gauge the business. If you look at where we are in EBITDA per kg right now, that number is, somewhere around 12.5 rupees a kg. I think what we've said in our previous conference call also is that we expect somewhere around 12 rupees a kg for the full year in terms of EBITDA per kg. So, that's roughly where we are. We think that, with the better capacity utilizations and with as well as, our own and a better product mix, as we're adding more of these more complex parts and more ramp-ups happening and exports continue to grow, we think we can get to somewhere around approximately 15 rupees or so per kg, right? So there's that's what we see down the horizon. If we go back a little bit and look at, where were we a few years ago, that number is probably between 9 to 10. I'd say 10 rupees per kg was probably more of a long-term average if you were to take the previous years. I think we've got into about 12. We're working for getting that number close to 15.
Sir, which are the important line items in your cost structure? Because right now everyone is worried about the cost structure, right? Like what happens to fuel, steel, or inflation and everything. Can you help us to explain your P&L in a way? Hypothetically, if I take 100 rupees as sales, and what are the COGS made up of for you?
Sorry, I lost you for a second, but I think I understood the question that you had. I think the biggest chunk, the first big chunk that's there in the cost structure, right, is the raw material pricing, right, which is steel scrap. This is a global commodity. There is an Indian market for it. And what we've seen by and large is, the Indian market tends to follow what the global trends are on pricing. Sometimes they get disconnected, but typically maybe 3 months later they converge again, right? So that's, I think, the first thing I think that is the highest of the cost factors that's there. The second, it would be actually, maybe right now it would be about 55% or so in terms of, so it's quite significant number. The second one would be the power and fuel, which is primarily electricity. Right. So in power and fuel, we are a highly energy intensive industry. The reason for being a highly energy intensive industry is you have to melt the metal, right? And so iron, if you see, the melting temperature is typically we pour it anywhere between 1400 degrees Celsius to 1550 degrees Celsius is what we are tapping the metal out of the furnace at, right? So that takes a lot of energy to melt the iron. We use all electric induction furnaces, so they are more efficient than some of the more traditional technologies. And typically, I would say that the cost of that might be 10 to 12% or so of the from a selling price perspective, right? Goes into energy. So the rest of it includes maybe some, if we're outsourcing machining, it's adding both to the top line as well as to the cost structure. So it kind of nets out. There might be some transportation cost, again, depending on the customer. It's either they pick it up or we deliver it, but majority is we actually deliver the products. So those are all passed through largely.
You don't have the raw material cost, right? Like the steel scrap and all. So the only way the delta to the margins can come if you are able to decrease your power fuel cost. Is there anything what we have done internally in order to see, because typically it's a low margin industry, right?
Yeah, so I think there are a couple of things that we're working on, right? One is how much energy we're consuming, and certainly we're trying to be more efficient. It also helps, and what we will see in the next couple of years as we produce more, our energy efficiency will get better. And that's because rather than melting the metal and then you're holding it because you cannot utilize it immediately, if you're more efficient, what happens is you melt metal and you utilize it immediately, right? So you don't spend energy holding it at a higher temperature. Similarly, some of your auxiliaries, which account for maybe about 25% or so of the power consumption, will remain flat, irrespective of whether you are at a medium level of production or a high level of production. They stay, some of those at least stay relatively flat. So given that situation, certainly we believe the next couple of years we will see better efficiencies in power. And at the same time, one of the things that we are actively doing is we're investing capital into wind and solar energy, which would help secure our future in terms of make sure energy availability. The second is also, I think we believe, the biggest impact that we have on the environment is coming from the electricity that we consume. Because as I mentioned, our raw material steel scrap is recycled. The sand also, about 95-97% of our sand we use is recycled. So I think the big area that we see as the impact that we can contribute is on the energy side. So certainly green energy is a way that we're going. And the third, obviously, because we've made an investment in a certain commitment in energy, the cost of the energy is also something that we are able to see some benefits on.
So I just wanted to understand one thing, okay? Like, it's been almost 15-20 years, you have reached 130,000 capacity, right? If I
so like, I think we reached sorry, continue.
My question is a long-term question, okay, not like next few years or quarters, and specifically for, say, a country like India, because whoever we talk to are very gung-ho in terms of the opportunities for India in manufacturing because of what is happening US, China, Europe, or anywhere in the world. So my simple question is that what we have done till now, say the last 15-20 years, we have a capacity of 130 using 90 right now, and probably in the next 2-3 years going to 130, EBITDA per kg improving. But do you see that in the next 5-7 years, you can do additional 150, 200,000, can that market size increase to that? Like, are we really talking about, as you said, that what happened with the forging 10 years back can possibly is happening now with casting? Like, are we even talking that is तरीके का market बढ़ सकता है आगे जाके? Like, you have that kind of confidence?
हाँ, बढ़ सकता है. So I think, see, I think there's great potential, right? I think there's one thing that's important, right? I think we need to have our head in the clouds and our feet on the ground, right? So I think we need to be able to see that, and I certainly see great opportunity, right, from a global market perspective, and India being potentially the preferred source of castings for the world. and also from a domestic perspective, where I think there's a lot of potential for growth, right? I mean, if you talk to the guys at Leyland or Tata, one of the statistics that they would like to point out is the number of trucks per million people that's there, or trucks per 1,000 people, right? And we are not even 1/3 of where China is, let alone the West, right? So they believe that there's a lot of potential for growth there. And I think as the rural market continues to be a focus for the government, I don't see breakaway growth happening in tractor, but I see reasonably steady growth happening in tractor. But I think really the X factor opportunity that I think that's there in front of us is the export market. I think there's India could do that, and certainly we believe we are very well positioned within the segment here in India, within the foundry industry here in India, to take advantage of that, because I think only maybe a dozen or so companies in India are capable of catering to the requirements of some of the best OEMs in the world.
So what would be our cost competitiveness in export market? How, I mean, in percentage terms, if we can share.
It would vary, I think, from customer to customer, product to product. It could also be impacted, I would say, a little bit by what freight rates had gone up in the last year and are now on the way down. But I would say perhaps that number could be anywhere between 10 to 30%, somewhere in that range would be my guess. I don't have precise numbers, but I know inflation in the US has bumped up their costs quite a bit in the last year. So of course, freight has also bumped up our costs quite a bit in the last year, but I think the freight is starting to normalize. And so we hope that, that delta will be a bigger driving force, for customers to move.
Sir, what is the cost you generally on the capex, if I have to put a 10,000 ton plant?
So if you were to just, rough number, right? If you were to say, look at our most recent investment that we had put in, it was a 60,000 ton investment at about 250 crores. So I think that's a rough ballpark. Certain things about that plant that were unique were because of the size of the plant and the type of products that we were making were very, very unique. And there's probably less than, and that's why we can produce, 400 kg parts. That's why we can produce a complete axle as a casting, whether it's used in commercial vehicle, off-highway, or tractor applications. So it may have been a little bit higher, but something in that ballpark perhaps is the right number.
Sir, we just did a rough calculation, okay? Like if all things go well, and even if you do say 110,000 volume, say FY24 with a EBITDA per kg of even 13, you could possibly do, this is mathematics, right? You could do EBITDA of at least 140, 150 crores. My only point is that you will be having cash flows going ahead, say in FY24, and more importantly, much higher in FY25, right?
Yes, I think that's what we believe, right? I without commenting on specific numbers.
No, I'm just saying
you're right. You're right. I mean, that's what we believe will happen, right? I think the cash flow certainly in the next few years will grow. One of the things on cash flow though that to keep in mind is that as we do more exports, the payment terms are longer for the export products, and therefore that's something that does have a negative impact on working capital, right? But yeah, you're right. I think that's.
And your net debt, I think, is around 200 crores, right? So it's not very high in terms of net debt as well. So
yes, I think I could be. I don't have the exact figures in front of me, but yeah, 200, 240 is something in that range, is what I recall.
Yeah, so you will generate higher cash flows. The debt will be under control. So we understand the story of say Nelcast till FY24 or 25 till you utilize your capacity which is there. But since you are so gung-ho on India, on manufacturing, what after say FY25, you will be sitting on cash. I don't know whether you will give shareholders like us, dividends or buyback.
I don't want to speculate on what the situation is in a couple of years, right? But certainly, I think our philosophy, what Nelcast has been, is to reinvest in the business. So if we see growth, I think we would certainly like to reinvest in the business for the growth that's there. I think at the same time, if you look at maybe, our history of dividends for the last 15 years since we've been listed, I think we also like to give good dividends. I think, as long as, cash flows can be managed and all of that, right? So I hope we'll see both. I think we would, I don't think we would make a,
How much time does it generally take for you, say if you announce a capex, it will take time for you to build up a plant, machinery, land, everything, right? So I'm just thinking that after FY25, will you start with
18 to 24 months typically? If you were talking about a greenfield, 18 to 24 months.
and will we go for greenfield or brownfield? Do you have land or something, which is there? So I'm just trying to understand that will you come at some announcements, say after 6 months or so, that that if things are so gung ho in India, you will need to do more capex, right?
Yeah, I think we have the ability to do it. I think it's all about understanding what's in front of us and the potential, and we'd rather be a little bit earlier with the capacity than later. So I think that's something that we would certainly do if, again, based on whatever projections, and we are in constant touch with our customers and looking at how.
You will always be a casting company, right?
At least in the near future.
So can we, if I have to see a bigger picture of Nelcast, are we thinking 130,000 enough MRLEA, or are we thinking next 5 years when the opportunity is there for India manufacturing and everything, just aim for 300,000, 400,000 going ahead in 5 years, 10 years? Is that the right way to look at it, or it is not?
Sorry, I lost you.
No, not a problem. We'll patch this up. Not a problem. I hope you can hear my voice, sir.
Yeah, I'm able to hear you.
My last question, sir. It's been 1 hour. Sorry, I'll repeat my question. So I was just asking that, that we understand the story till FY25, okay, for Nelcast as a company. But I was just trying to understand that, do you have an ambition that, that since there is a lot of opportunity for India, and especially for a manufacturing sector and casting as a sector, as you believe that it is where forging was 10 years back, can Nelcast think about going to say 250,000 or 300,000 in next 3-5 years?
Certainly, I would like to. I see the potential, right? Obviously, we'll have to, we can't just, blindly close our eyes and put that number and run towards it. But I think the opportunities will come, and I think we will respond to those opportunities accordingly, right? And, I see the potential of what you're talking about. But again, we have to start to see the ground move in that direction, and we will also, keep running in that direction as the ground moves.
What are the risks, sir, in your business? We have talked all good things.
So I think one is cyclicality, right? That's there in the business, right? The cyclicality in the business, we've done our best to de-risk it from, the domestic CV cycle, but we are, I think part of the challenge is the world has become one bigger global intertwined economy, right? So, we'll have to see how that impacts us, right? Any kind of a global recession or something like that, because I think we've realized, especially in 2008, how intertwined we all are. So I think it's the overall industry and growth. The other part potentially could be tariffs or something like that, especially when the export markets that might have some impact. We don't know. I mean, we're not aware of anything that's in the pipeline right now, but certainly something that could happen, right? Like what happened with China and when Donald Trump was the president. So I see, largely those external factors, and I think the internal factor is execute. I think it's our ability to execute on the business that's in front of us and the opportunities in front of us, and win the business and execute it and build that reputation, right? I think, as I said, we're very mindful of the fact that it takes years to build a reputation and perhaps days to ruin it. So we need to make sure that we keep that going.
So you mentioned about Craftman. We are investors in Craftman. Can you give us a small feedback on the company? It will be a good check as well.
No, I think Craftsman's a great company. We work very closely with them. Yeah, I mean, they're good. I mean, so a little, well, maybe it's not a secret, but I also hold a few shares in them, a small amount.
Big fan, sir. Big fan. Mr. Ravi has done very, very solid.
Yeah.
So this is the thing what I'm seeing now. Like I was few days back, I was in Sincera, Bangalore. So earlier, say 10 years back, we always used to think about a forging or a casting company. We never thought there are engineering companies. Like I only remember about Lakshmi Machine Works or Carborundum, these kind of companies, and they don't like to call themselves as a forging or a casting company. Like when I meet Craftsmen, Samsera, the kind of engineering capabilities, what I think some of you companies, you yourself, I think what they have built is just amazing. Amazed to see some of the plants completely automated, all robots and all. Single machine costs 5 crores, 6 crores, 10 crores. Clients all over the world are coming over there. It was a different feel altogether. It was a different India altogether for me. When you see the plants and the automation what these guys have done.
Yeah.
I just hope and believe, sir, but for us, honestly, the India story and the manufacturing story is very big. And companies like you can...
I think it's there, right? I think, barring, something going terribly wrong with the world geopolitical situation, I think that's the story that I firmly believe in. Certainly for the next decade and beyond.
Well, likewise, sir, because I think you guys have worked very hard in terms of, the building the capabilities over last many, many years. And you have understood what is right, what is wrong. Created very complex products, complex engineering, if I can say, which is there. We wish you all the best, sir. We wish you all the best. Any questions for us, Deepakji? We have been asking you if there's anything for us.
No, Arinderji and Abhishek, thanks a lot for the interaction. I enjoy these kind of interactions and, certainly some thought-provoking questions, even for me who lives and breathes this every day. So thank you very much for, having the spotlight on us, for your interest in learning more about Nelcast and, the casting industry. And I look forward to more interactions in the future.
Lovely, sir. And thank you for being our guru, our teacher today. We learned a lot from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.